Yes. Is the price worth it? Absolutely. Need all the load of information to help come up with a decision before you buy? Of course you do. Want me to stop and get on with the video? Yeah, I know you do. I'm sorry. Start the video! Just a little disclaimer here before the video starts. I am not in any way, shape, or form sponsored or endorsed by Gamoto. I purchased the DIVALLER controller with the Sanwa buttons and optical controllers on my own accord, and my review will be based on information and comparisons of my experience of the Project DIVA Arcade's Future Tone cabinet, as some are available in the US. And the last time I played on the cabinet was a year ago, so I'll compare it by memory. And also we'll compare the feel from the limited run Hori dedicated controllers for Future Tone and MegaMix. And lastly, my review is based on my opinion and analyzation of the DIVALLER controller. I will do my best to compare all information between the dial, customized buttons and micro switches, and the Sanwa buttons and optical switches. Also, I did test all the controller's functions as I own a PC, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and Nintendo Switch, along with all the Project DIVA games. Now, with that in mind, let's get on with the review. Well, you might be wondering, what on earth is the DIVALLER? Well, to put it short, the DIVALLER is an arcade-style replica controller inspired by the popular Project DIVA Arcade Future Tone cabinet controller from the specs and functions of the Project DIVA games. The first batch of the DIVALLER were way back in September 2019, and curiously, I planned to purchase one, and now the time has come. This, my friends, is the DIVALLER. The DIVALLER is created by Gamoto, and Gamoto put in a work, sweat, and tears since the teaser in the early 2019 to replicate the arcade controller from Project DIVA Arcade Future Tone. Gamoto is a company that makes high standard and premium quality arcade controllers that are expensive but supreme and high in quality. Is this hype worth it? Is it all what it's supposed to be? Let's find out more. Also, when you do obtain the DIVALLER, the following is included in the package: the DIVALLER controller, a 1 USB-A to USB-B cable, which is used to connect to the DIVALLER to the console or PC, and a USB-A to USB-C that you usually connect to your DIVALLER to a 5-volt charge, a wall charger power adapter, and a little product manual, but you can view that online. Do note that the DIVALLER also has a 180-day warranty for all of purchase, so you'll be covered for the 180 days in length. Next, let's move on to the hardware. The DIVALLER comes in two various options for the buttons and switches when you order. The default option is $439 and uses the DIVALLER Chinese customized 100mm push buttons, customized with a duo combination of two different springs, a 100G spring and 60G spring, and Omron 100G micro switches. The second, and in my opinion the best option, is $598 and uses the Sanwa 100mm push buttons, the 100G springs, and the optical switches. The only differences between the options are really the push buttons and switches, and between the options can actually go in your favor and can make or break your experience. The Sanwa options uses the Sanwa brands and actual push buttons and optical switches as the same in the arcade, while the DIVALLER is an alternative and cheaper choice, which is good for a friendly beginner experience. The controller is measured at 69.2 centimeters in length, 10 centimeters in height, 24.2 centimeters in width, and it weighs at 9.3 kilograms, which is really heavy. I was really surprised with how heavy this controller was when I first opened it. The case of the DIVALLER is made of very solid and dense metal in two main colors of black and teal blue, making it really unique as most controllers mostly use plastic casing and sometimes wood cutting casing. The aluminum alloy metal feels really premium, and the top of the case of the DIVALLER holds a thick cut glass. The touch slider is made from acrylic glass, which is close to the arcade but not exact, but it still works and is highly responsive. If you choose to disassemble the controller, you can actually change the cover art on the controller, which I might do later, but for right now I feel contemplated with what I have. The Gamoto website has a template to create your own artwork and to make it your very own. I'll link the files and website in the description if you choose to create your own artwork. Something else to note, that the extra buttons around the controller, they're not actually arcade buttons at all. They're actually instead keyboard buttons with Akawi red switches. That explains why the buttons felt more like keys on a keyboard or a fashion custom-made typewriter keyboard instead of an arcade push button. And if honestly, it has a better clicking speed response and feels really nice. The yellow R-Fin button is really a programmer button, since the DIVALLER does have a lot of special features. You can actually change modes and even modes to the touch slider as well using this key. You can use these set of keys in combinations, and the modes to change in between are the keys for future tone and F and X mode, which change in between the two. Changing to PPD mode, which is the fan-made Project Diva game ProjectProjectDIVA, change in between the DS4 mode, which is basically the PS4's controller, and change into a last but kind of beta mode, which is the 16 key mode, which I haven't tested yet, but I will test later. Each mode has their own control layout and is not the same, as you can see from the diagram, which does show a lot of different buttons and combination functions. Also, you'll know when the input is completely successful because the four 100mm push buttons will flash 3 times simultaneously. In F and X mode, the touch slider works as the left and right analog sticks for the single and big double star nodes, and has a great trigger for a trail of star nodes. The directional buttons are linked as one button on the main 4 100mm push buttons. And speaking of modes, the R-Fin button also changes the color hue and switches to rainbow effect on the touch slider panel. The 100mm push buttons lights are powered and controlled inside the controller via USB. However, the touch slider panel dynamic RGB lights are powered by a separate USB power source, which is the USB-A to USB-C cable, which does require a power adapter for at least 5 volts or more. And because of the separated power, the lights are extremely bright, and I really don't recommend it having on the highlight, especially if your eyes are sensitive to bright lights. Also, playing on Arcade Future Tone using a mod of a modder, the controller actually reacts and functions just like the arcade controller touch panel, and the LEDs on the push buttons also reacts the same way when choosing options. Upon touch, if you long slide and hold the full slide, it will continue until you release, and RGB will illuminate as a water ripple effect on the solid light mode. When changing modes with these key combinations, you can change from various hues of colors from dark to brightness, changing it to the various colors of the Vocaloids. The touch slider on the arcade control panel does have an integration of changing it, but it's more complex to change the color than changing it on the DIVALLER and Hori controller. Even in the hue modes, the DIVALLER also has the rainbow ripple effect, where the rainbow effect will slide and move along from where your last slide note, moving all the way from left in a rainbow hue or moving all the way right. I was a bit worried about the touch slider, as the Hori's touch slider has a 15 to 18% dead zone. The arcade has of a dead zone, but it's not noticeable or possible to hit the dead zones unless you're wedging your fingers underneath the touch slider panel. Thankfully, there appears to be no visible dead zones in the touch slider on the DIVALLER, but that could be because the DIVALLER's touch slider uses a more high dense hertz on the wider range and radius of the touch slider. The DIVALLER also has a built-in headphone jack using the chipset quality of the DS4 in 44 Hz, which gives it a loud and crystal clear quality. So I highly recommend you to adjust the headphones, because believe me, the volume is loud, especially when you hit your buttons. The headphone functions only work on the PC, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 4. The Nintendo Switch does not support the headphone jack, as it is not an included feature on the Nintendo Switch itself. If you do plan to use the headphones on the DIVALLER, do be careful where free wires are hanging above the DIVALLER on the touch slider, because the wire can trigger the touch slider, just as well as Hori's controller has as well. Now on the arcade cabinet, this isn't a big issue, as there's a huge distance of space between the player and the cabinet itself. As for playing, the controller has a smooth input play on both the Dawa and the Sanwa buttons. However, one issue of the input lag I noticed is that the latency is much smoother on the PC, PlayStation 4, and PS3, even though the PlayStation 3 runs at a 30 frames per second and seamlessly 60 frames per second on the Project Diva Dreamy Theater games. The latency on a Switch is a bit behind or lagging a bit, but I think that's because the Nintendo Switch is dock powered using the Switch tablet, but it's a minor latency of an input delay on every 6th to 7th note. For the Nintendo Switch, I highly recommend you to plug the USB into the USB inside of the Nintendo Switch dock's flap, as the outer USB port does have a much more delay and lag of the input of the buttons. It's not a big issue, but I do have noticed that in using the front of the USB hub, the buttons are a bit behind, even on my 4K 120Hz TV and 144Hz monitor. It's not a big issue, but it is a bit noticeable. For the Nintendo Switch, I recommend to have a separate input latency setting instead of a shared latency setting on each song in MegaMix. There really isn't much to explain on the software side. The DIVALLER is compatible on the PC that is on Windows 7 or later, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and the Nintendo Switch. The DIVALLER is compatible to all the main Project Diva titles, from the PlayStation 3's Project Diva Dreamy Theater and F series to the PlayStation 4's Future Tone and Project DIVAXXX, and to the latest of the Project Diva title, Project Diva MegaMix on the Nintendo Switch. The DIVALLER even works on the fan-made Project Diva game called PPD, or in full title, ProjectProjectDIVA. And Gamato has even added more compatibility of games, and honestly, When I looked at this list, I think Gamato just ran out of ideas on what other rhythm games to make compatible with, because some of these games listed, I asked myself, why? Also, to keep note, the buttons do play really loud. And here's a bit of a sound test I did. Here's one from a distance. And here is for a close-up of all the buttons and keys. Now comes down to the main questions. Should I buy this controller? Which version should I get? Is the difference of the buttons and switches too big of a notice? Well, I recommend this controller to hardcore DIVA players and players that are used to the arcade layout from playing the Project DIVA Arcade Future Tone cabinet and want a true arcade experience at home. I don't recommend this to DIVA players that are just starting off. The shipping is extremely fast, like really fast. My DIVALLER would have arrived a week earlier, but this error was my fault as I misspelled my address by one letter. Thankfully, by keeping track on my tracking number, the carrier did allow me to change my actual address, and it arrived in 3 business days later. I do recommend the Sanwa options as it's more of a close arcade feel, but do what to say, go with what on your target budget. If you actually do save up, the decision is more opinionally on you and what are you willing to spend. The only minor difference is only just the buttons and switches that can only make or break your experience if you're just starting out. But want a closer experience, I do recommend the Sanwa, but if you want to just save money and still just play an arcade style, then I recommend the DIVALLER. The DIVALLER version, again, uses 2 separate springs combined, which can be a bit janky and actually louder than the Sanwa option. I do have a friend that I did test the DIVALLER version, and to her, it's still holding up to this day. It really comes down to how often you do maintain and clean your own controller, because even on your own custom-made controller or cabinet, you do have to maintain and clean it on a regular basis. As the DIVALLER controller is expensive because of the quality and more function RGB on a touch slider that is near perfect to an arcade replica of Project DIVA Arcade Future Tone compared to the Hori. The quality feels more premium, the buttons and switches are the only difference. Most of these parts are close and some even use the exact same parts used in the arcade itself. I do feel that the price is reasonable, especially with what you're getting. Parts are not cheap at all. So to me, honestly, with these premium parts and near perfect replica feel, the price feels more reasonable, especially when you see how many scalpers price gorge the crap out of the Hori controllers. Like, my god. Sorry, but I'm not gonna pay over $800 to $1,600 for a Hori controller, which I do not recommend to support, by the way. And that's just without shipping and taxes first, because you might as well get DIVALLER if you're even willing to spend even close to that much, as a DIVALLER does have more console and PC compatibility, as the Hori only works on that one specific console. And as for me, the Sanwa, I didn't encounter any issues at all, and I'm still loving it to this day, as I can't go to the arcade as the pandemic, and speaking of which, the shipping is what is a hit or miss. Now, some people did notice, if they've been keeping track from the first batch of 2019, that the price has increased on the shipping. However, that's not Gamato's doing, it's actually the shipping carrier. Because as people may know, COVID-19 has spread around, and unfortunately, the carrier's shipping service increased because of this. And unfortunately, Gamato really can't do anything about it, as they don't have any say-so about the service of shipping. Because here's a screenshot of how much shipping was in the first batch back in 2019, and here's how much shipping is right now. That's why I say I recommend you save up first and go for your budget if you do want a more arcade experience at home. That's all for now, and I hope I did do this video justice, as this is my first time doing a review video, and yeah, I know I hate my voice too, as I may hear people say in the comment section. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching, everyone, and please be safe.